So this is your tutorial for your quick and comfy jumpsuit. It's a really comfortable jumpsuit to make, and I get loads of positive comments when I do wear this, so it's a nice one to make. Now, it's made out of stretch jersey, and the reason being is we're keeping the pattern simple. You've got a V-neck, which is your access to get into your garment, so you dress through the neck area, so there are no zips, there's no fastenings at all, so we are keeping it very, very simple. Obviously, if you're a confident sewer, you can use a different type of fabric and add in something like a zip in the centre back seam if you're wanting to, but we are pitching it as a confident beginner because there aren't any zips and fastenings with this one. So yeah, really nice, really easy, and I'm sure it'll become one of your firm favourites. And you've only got straight seams, so there's no shaping. In fact, when you look at the instructions, you'll see that the instructions cover 2.5 sizes, and that is for the sleeved version and the sleeveless version, so just shows how easy it is. You've got your different body measurements that relate to the cutting lines. They're very generous as well, so the 26 would probably go up to a size 28 to be fair, because as I say, it's got a lot of fluid movement. Brilliant quality paper, so you'll be able to use this several times, and you can see you've got your colour coding and mentions your seam allowance as well here as well, so just bear that in mind. And also, if you want to use an overlocker, that do consider that, because obviously an overlocker will trim away some of the fabric if you're using a blade. So there you go, that is your pattern. Hopefully it's one that will become a firm favourite of yours. So what do we suggest that you use to make it up? Well, if you're not wanting to do the binding, then you could actually use some seam tape, and this is the flexible one that Vaseline create, and it's perfect for any jersey fabric where you're not adding a binding in the pattern. I'll be showing you how to add a binding in a couple of different techniques, but you might just prefer to use a binding, a tape, this flexible tape, which you iron onto the fabric and then you kind of fold it back and then top stitch it in place. So it is a variation. It might be with your pattern that you don't have enough fabric there to cut a binding, so it is an alternative. And yeah, I know lots of people do like to use it. So the pattern itself does show you how to create the binding. So the binding is just going to wrap over the raw edges of your garment pieces, and then you would top stitch through all the layers. Yeah, that's how you create it. But as I say, if you want to just top stitch it, then maybe the seam tape is the way to go. And we've got this on the website. You've got a light and a dark version, black and white, and you kind of choose the best for your fabrics. And you can see there, you're just ironing it onto your fabric, fold it back, and then stitch it in place when you need to. So that's something that you might want to use. So you've got that. Something else that you will definitely need are pins, and a good quantity of pins as well, to make sure that your jersey fabric doesn't move around. Could use quilt clips if you're wanting to as well, because of course this is something that you might like to use. And a pen is also useful, especially if you're planning on using an overlocker, because you can use the pen to actually mark your seam allowance. So draw a line 1 centimetre in from your raw edge. So let me show you. So you've got your raw edge here. I've actually done this on the overlocker to neaten it as well, and that's something you can do with your garment pieces, is overcast or overlock the edges, and that kind of helps you work with stretch fabrics as well. So you still got your flexibility there, but it just makes them a little bit more manageable. In fact, let's talk about that first. So if you're wanting to just neaten your garment pieces, I'm just cutting away a scrap of fabric here just to show you how an overlocker works. So an overlocker will have a blade. Sometimes you can take the blade out, and you just literally are cutting away your fabrics and overcasting the edges, as you can see there. And it just means that it's useful for tricky fabrics, stretch fabrics, slidey fabrics, and having the overcast edge or the overlocked edge makes it a little bit more manageable. So you'll still have your stretch, which is obviously key. You wanting to have your stretch, but it just makes it a little bit easier to handle sometimes, and sometimes stops it rolling. So that is just neatening the edge of your garment pieces. So if you're wanting to get the seam stitched, as you can see on the center of this piece of fabric, it's a good idea to draw a line with the pen to show your stitch line. So my overlocker has got 2 needles. The left hand needle, I wouldn't want it to come in any further than the line I'm drawing here. So if the left hand needle comes to the left of the line, then I'm making the garment smaller. So the area that I've got to the right of the line is basically free area that I can use for the seam. That second line I've just drawn in, you can imagine that being the blade cutting off 6mm there or thereabouts. And in the construction, if you're using it to construct, you would literally pop your fabrics under, right sides together. The left hand needle would follow that drawn line, and then the blade can cut away the edge. So a couple of different results. So the first one, where you're neatening your fabrics and then actually doing your construction on the sewing machine, you can see that's exactly what I've done here. So it's not taken away any of the fabric, or maybe just a smidgen, just to neaten the edge. So I've used the overlocker to neaten the edge, and you've still got the stretch there. And then I've used a sewing machine to do the construction. So I've used one of the stretch stitches. There's a nice one that's called like a lightning stitch, and that means that you've still got that stretch in your fabrics there. So check out your sewing machine. More often than not, there'll be at least one stretch stitch that you can use, and you might have some overcast stitches as well. And the overcast stitches are great if you're wanting to neaten your pattern pieces or your fabric pieces, but you can use those for your construction as well if you're wanting to. So do a bit of a practice on a scrap piece. Here you can see I've used my overlocker to do the construction as well. So that's where it's important for that pen line, because that left hand needle, don't want it to come inside of that pen line, and the blade is cut away probably about 6mm to give a nice neat edge. So brilliant quality pattern. It's a big pattern as well, so it's nearly 3 meters of paper there. You've got your different lines for your different sizes, and they're color coded, but equally so the lines are broken in different patterns, so you can kind of follow that. If you're not able to see the colours, then you can follow the line as well. So a couple of different ways that you can work with that. So nice and easy, hopefully, and this will hopefully make it one of your favourite patterns. So I have gone ahead and I've cut my fabric out following the lines for the size that I've chosen, and it's quite simplistic in style. So quite often with a pattern you'll have a front piece and you'll have a back piece, and they'll be different. With this pattern you've got two main body pieces, but one is with sleeves and one is just without sleeves. So this one, as you can see, is the sleeve version, and the other option is without sleeves. The only difference being is the actual armhole area, and your front and your back pieces are exactly the same. So the armhole on this one is a slightly different shape because we're going to put the sleeves in, but it's the same on the front and on the back. And because it's all done with jersey, it's very forgiving, and it just makes it easier for us to make the pattern this way. It means that we can put some extra features in there, and without the expense of getting an even larger pattern. There's no joining with this pattern as well, so if you can imagine, it's going from the shoulder right the way down to the hem. It's a big piece of fabric. So you've got a few marks on there as well, which are going to help. You've got the notches under the sleeve, so that's going to help with your lining up there. If you want to lengthen or shorten your design, then you can do so using this line here, and that is kind of dependent on where you want the crotch to sit on your body. It sits quite low because the pattern itself is explaining how to use a belt with it. So but the halfway line might be that you're wanting to alter the length of the body, have that crotch sitting a little higher. Maybe you want to make a contrast between the top and the bottom. So if you do want to do that, use that line, and that creates a join in the middle. All you need to remember is, if you are planning on using that join line, to make sure that your top extends 1 centimetre below the line and your bottom extends 1 centimetre above. So that will give you your 1 centimetre seam allowance. Join your fabrics together at this stage, so that'll be the first stage, and then you've got your pattern pieces ready to do the rest of the construction. So yeah, you've also got your belt loops, yeah, you can see a little kind of mark there for your belt loops. I'd use a tailor's tack for that. You don't have to put a belt in place, and if you don't, then don't put the belt loops in. The positioning of the belt, though, does make a difference to the overall drop. So if you're opting not to have the belt loops and not to wear a belt with it, then you just need to consider the drape of the garment. So it's going to hang a little bit lower because the belt will pull it up higher. So you need to consider that if you're wanting to do that, you can gather up the fabric above the waist, but it will make the legs shorter if you are using the belt. So if you decided not to have the belt, then what you'll find is the pockets may sit a little bit lower. Obviously, everybody's waistline sits at a different position, so if you want to play around with that, you can do. But the position is kind of like a guideline, so alter the belt loops if you want. So these are the markings now for the pocket. Now, if you're opting not to have the belt, then the pockets could well sit a little bit too low, because the belt pulls the garment up, which means that the pockets sit more on your hips. If you're not pulling the garment up, then you need to consider where the pockets are going to sit. So my suggestion would be is to move the pockets further up the body. So rather than having them sitting on the notches, have the centre point of the belt, or the belt loop, sitting in the centre of the pocket. Here you go. So rather than the pocket sitting here, then I would take it further up and find the centre point of the pocket and sit it there. Obviously the raw edges lining up, and then the drape of the fabric will mean that the pocket sits at a more comfortable position. So yeah, so just line up the raw edges of the fabric and then it will sit wherever you need it to sit. Total preference. You might not want pockets at all, to be fair. It's entirely up to you. So there's lots of variations. I just wanted to make you aware of some of the things that you might need to consider with regard to the actual length of the garment. Talking of which, it's an ankle length garment as the pattern shows, but you can lengthen it. Again, if you're wanting to make it short, you can do. You can shorten in the body part, so that will mean that the crotch comes a little higher, as I've said. But the way that the legs are designed is it's a very open, fluid type of flow to it. So you haven't got any tapering when you get to the ankle. So that means that you could cut it away quite easily. So you can make it into a play suit if you're wanting to cut it at the thigh area. It might be that you want it just above the knee, but you can see you haven't got any tapering there on the hemline, which makes it very easy for you to turn up at whatever point you choose. So it could be an ankle grazer. And also as well, if you haven't got enough fabric to make it into the full length, the ankle length, then do consider making it a little bit shorter as well. So yeah, loads of different ways you can adapt it to make it suit you. But just wanted the hemline to be a nice easy one. So if you're going to be creating using a jersey fabric, you may have a directional pattern. So do consider that as well with your fabric pieces. I've cut this out of a single colour. So I've actually cut all 4 layers at the same time. If you've got a directional fabric, then you might not want to do that because you want to make sure that you've got pattern matching and things like that. So you might need to accommodate for some extra fabric as well, especially if you've got a large repeat. You need to make sure that the centre front is identical if you've got a pattern. So your front piece on the left and your front piece on the right is going to match up perfectly along that centre line, and obviously on the back as well. So just consider that. If you're a novice, first time of making this pattern potentially, then I would suggest you go for a plain jersey, because then you haven't got to worry about any of that and you can focus on the construction. So yeah, all things to remember. So non-directional you don't have to worry about, or even just a small repeat where you're not necessarily going to match up the pattern either. So yeah, so I've chosen my fabric. I've cut out all of my pattern pieces and I'm just going to neaten up the raw edges. So obviously you've got a lot of stretch, and what can happen is that you can overstretch the fabric. So an overlock or an overcast stitch on your pattern pieces can make it easier to manage, especially if you're a novice, because you'll still have the stretch, but then you'll also have a little bit of a restriction as well. And you could use the overcast stitches on your sewing machine for this. So most stitches will have at least one or two. Sorry, most machines, should I say, will have 1 or 2 of these. So just explore the options, do a little bit of a test on some of the waist fabric. So yeah, it's just an easy way. If you're going to be making a lot of jersey garments, then do consider getting an overlocker. You can get really good ones at reasonable prices. A 4th thread you can pick up for around £400, and obviously you can get others as well. I wouldn't overcast the edge of the pockets, because that's going to be on the inside, so I'm not worrying too much about that. And the binding pieces as well, it's up to you whether you want to use these or neaten the edges. If you want to do the quicker version, then maybe use the binding tape. On this fabric I'd probably use the darker, but you can also use that flexible tape when you're actually making your binding. So there's a variety of different ways that you can make the neck and arm holes. So binding can be attached. There's another version later on in the video as well. But using the binding, what you will do is you'll fold the raw edges in and create a binding, a bit like a bias binding, and that will be used to neaten the edges of the garment itself. Sleeve pieces. The front part of the sleeve and the back part of the sleeve are identical. So when you're actually laying your fabric out, if you find you haven't got enough fabric to lay it out completely flat, then you can fold it, find the centre line and place the centre line on the fold of your fabric. Depends on the width and how much fabric that you've got. So you can be quite frugal if you need to. And you can see the notches are the same on the front and the back, and you've got a notch for the centre of your sleeve, which is going to sit on the shoulder when you come to insert them. So you might want to fold it, but yeah, all of those little markings are going to help you with your lining up there. Once you've prepped all of your fabrics, we're going to get started with the belt loop. So just going to take these two pieces, and all I need to do is fold them right sides together. Again, there's a few different ways you can make these up if you wanted to. I'm going to make them into little tubes, so I'm going to use my overlocker. If you want to make yours wider, maybe you can use a belt out of your wardrobe, then you can do. It's entirely up to you. So that one's a little bit wider. It's a little bit longer as well, because if you were using a wider belt. So all I'm going to do is stitch down the edge there, and then I will turn it through to make my belt loops. So here you go. So I've got my two pieces. Just need to turn them through. Again, a few different ways you can do this. I'm using one of these little turning tools, and it's got a hook on the end. So just catch the fabrics, lock it in place, and then pull it through. It's quite a narrow piece of fabric, so a bit of jiggling, but then you kind of get it to turn through. There we go. Oh, pulling it there. Sorry, you can't quite see what I'm doing there, but yeah, just pull it through. And once you've got the first bit through, you can kind of hold on to that and pull the rest of it back on itself. There you go. Suddenly pops. So there you go. Number one done. Quite a tight tube, but the stretch in the fabric does help. And then you would fold that flat. You can either have the seam down the side, or the seam can sit in the centre. It's up to you. And then what I tend to do is I do a top stitch down the left and right hand side, and then that makes it sit flatter, so it's not such like a tube. Do that with both of the pieces. And there you go. I'm just going to go and top stitch those in place. So there you go. Once they're top stitched, they will sit quite flat, and they are going to sit in the side seam above the pockets. So they'll sit pretty much like that to create your belt loop. So let's go back to the garment piece. So you'll have 4 pocket bags if you're putting 2 pockets in, and you'll attach one to each of the pieces. Mentions it in the instructions which way around. Just make sure that you've got the pocket bag facing in the right direction, so the rounded point is going down to the hemline, and you'll position that between the notches. And if you are putting the belt in, then you'll have a little tailor's tack or a little mark where you are going to position those. Obviously this is all optional, so it's entirely up to you. So bend the loop round, put a couple of little pins in there just to secure it in place. And I tend to do right side, well, it's right sides facing the fabric, so right sides together. And then this will become the front of my garment. There we go. And then you do the same on the other side. So that is one half. So you can see you've got the pocket bag on the outside and the belt loop on the outside. So sew the pocket to the main piece between the notches and stitch the belt loop in place within the seam allowance, so it's just tacking it in place. Next thing to do is to sew the 2 front pieces together along the centre front seam. So you'll line up the raw edges, and this will be from the bottom of the V down to the crotch area. So I tend to pin at the top where the V is, and then also the crotch area, and then put pins along the full length. So when you're putting your pins in place, if you're constructing it using a sewing machine, then you're okay doing the pins in the direction that I'm showing you here. If you plan on using your overlocker, then I would have them pinned at 90 degrees to where they are at the moment, so running parallel to the raw edge, and a little way in as well, because you don't want to catch those pins on your overlocker blade. So repeat the process on the back, and there you go. You can see we've got the V in the front there. That's your centre front. That's going right the way down to the crotch area. And then we've already stitched the pocket bags in place. And do exactly the same on your other piece as well. So you've got front and a back created now. So there you go, belt loops on the front piece. I'm going to join these 2 pieces together on one of the shoulders, and this is detailed in the pattern here. So you're creating an area where the neckline will still be open. A couple of different ways you can do this. So if you prefer to stitch both of the shoulder seams together and then create a loop of your binding, then you can do that. But the reason I've done it this way is when you actually looked at jumpsuits on the high street, this is the technique that would have been used to put them together. So joining on one shoulder, so plenty of pins, you don't want that fabric to move around. Okay, and we're going to take that to the sewing machine and use a stretch stitch to stitch together. And there you go, you can see you've got a nice seam. And press the seam open on this occasion, but that could have been done on the overlocker. Got any raw edges? Naturally, just trim those away. Keep it all neat and tidy. There you go. So now let's open this out so as you can see. And we're going to attach our binding now. So the binding is going to go all the way around, but we need to get that ready first. So I've taken my binding piece for the neck and I've overlocked all the sides. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it makes it a little bit easier to manage and stops the jersey rolling. So if you haven't got an overlocker, then use your overcast. And you can see it's going to wrap around the jersey fabric to create a nice neat finish. So I'm going to start by pressing those raw edges together, and then meet in the middle. So you can give it a little bit of a spray. Something like Best Press is a good one. And that will help getting a nice crisp edge. Now, I'm actually going to use some of the flexible tape. I don't know if this is the way you meant to use it, but I found it helped. So I thought I'd share it with you. So this is going to sit in the centre. Now, this is designed, actually, let me show you how it's designed. So if you don't want to put a binding on, you could use this flexible tape direct to the garment. So what that means is you would pop the tape with the rough side, which is where the glue side is. That would make contact with your fabric. So you'd tape it down. Iron it down. And then you would fold in and then just top stitch from the right side. So there's no binding. So you can do it that way. But I just like the binding. I think it gives it more of a professional finish. So yeah. So that is one way of doing it. Just fold it in. Top stitch from the other side. And there you go. Good to go. Might not have enough fabric to do a binding. So yeah. It's good to know these different options are there. So yeah. Put it against the needle edge. Press it in place. Fold it in. And then top stitch. Nice and simple. But as I said, I like that bound edge. So that's what I'm going to do here. So the tape itself, I'm actually going to fuse. I'm going to iron it to the centre of the tape that I've cut out. So the binding tape. So that's going to go in the middle like so. And then when I come to fold it in half and press it, it gives me a nice neat edge. So just press it. Try not to stretch the fabrics too much. And just press it. Give it a chance to melt the adhesive and then move the iron on. So press and move. Give it a press from the other side as well, and then as you can see, just trim away any excess so it doesn't get stuck to your iron. And then what we need to do is to fold in those raw edges. You could use one of the binding rulers that we make to do this. And you can get it, it's a square binding, the binding square that I'm holding here. It does come as part of a trio if you do want to go for the quilting pack, or you can just go for it by itself. And this is useful for creating binding, for creating belts, bag straps, all sorts. And you'll find this on the website. And you've got little slots, so the idea is that you will feed your fabric through those slots. So start off by folding in the raw edges and give it a little bit of a press. And then you feed it through the binding square, so it will go up through the slot that's in the closest to the centre, and then down the outside one. Fork pins are useful as well, because these will minimise the movement when you come to press. I've got two little prongs on them, as you can see there, and they just have got a bit more stability. So just push them in like so. Put two in there. Whoops, daisy. Pop those away. And then you use the iron to move the binding square along. So just run it along, kind of feed it in with your less dominant hand, and then off you go. Once you get to the end, just reposition it and off you go again. There we go. Once you get to the end, or just press any bits that aren't completely flat. And you can also give it a press from the other side as well, just to make sure that you've got a nice neat binding. After that, just press it in half and then work your way along the full length, and it is ready then for you to attach to your garment. So coming back in with the jumpsuit now. So you can see we've got an open shoulder and a closed shoulder where it's been stitched together. And you can take your binding. First of all, make sure that it doesn't twist, and find your centre point. And the middle is going to sit on the stitched shoulder. And all I'm going to do is place that, oops, trim away any little threads. Place the centre point over that shoulder seam. Now, when these are being made in factories, they use this technique because it's quite a quick technique. You haven't got to kind of make a loop, because if you join the two shoulders together, you're making a loop, and you can do that if you're wanting to. But I'd just use this technique. As I say, it's the one that they use in the manufacture of garments like this. So you pin it place. And then work your way along. Now, it's a good idea to find the centre points as you go. So the raw edge needs to go on the end of the open shoulder. And then you'll find the centre points after that. So again, make sure it doesn't twist. There we go. Nice and secure at the ends and the halfway point, and then just find the centre point. So the centre point is going to sit where the V is. So you're just going to pull that centre point, open it up and wrap it around the raw edge and pin in place. And you're pretty much going to do that for each of the sections. So again, just stretch it to get it a nice kind of balance. Find the centre point. You will find that your binding is slightly shorter than the neckline, because you need it to pull it in a little bit, not to gather it and pucker it too much, but just to draw it in so it's not too gapey, not too baggy. So it's kind of wrap it round and pin it. Take a bit of time to do this as well, because it's much easier to take the time and get it balanced at this stage than to stitch it and then try to unpick. I personally find it really difficult to unpick a stretch stitch, because a stretch stitch, if it's quite a small stitch, is very tricky, especially if you use a same colour thread, which you will be doing because you kind of want it to blend in with the fabric. So pin it. It might be that you need to unpin and then reposition and then pin again. Just take a little bit of time to get the balance of that neckline right. So you can see there, that's quite a kind of straight in comparison with the other side. So just gathering it in a little bit, move that centre point just so you're happy that it's balanced left to right. Because obviously the V itself, you'll see the left and the right hand side of the V from the front or the back. So just take a few minutes just to make sure it's nicely balanced. Stretching out the binding as you need to, and then just wrapping the binding around the raw edge as you go. So you carry on doing that. Find your halfway points, find your quarter points, just to make sure everything's sitting nicely, and make sure that you use plenty of pins to get it to sit in place. So take a little bit of time to make sure that that's all balanced. You might need to move a few pins around, but it's much easier to make sure that you're happy with the stitch line at this stage than to find yourself having to unpick at a later stage. So top stitch the binding in place and then put the shoulder together. So you can see there, top stitch, I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit, but just the other shoulder, while I was at the sewing machine, I just put right sides together and stitched, just lining up that edge, as you can see. And as I say, that's the way that they create these garments when they're making them in the factories. So now the binding is all the way around, top stitched in place, lovely neat finish. And you would do a similar process with regards to the sleeveless version if you're going to be doing that. Okay, we'll come back to this, but here's an alternative way of attaching your binding. So take your binding strip, and rather than bringing the raw edges into the centre, we're simply going to fold it in half. Give it a press so that it'll sit nice and flat. And this is a perfect way of attaching your binding if you have an overlocker. There we go. So that's all pressed. So the raw edges of the binding are going to attach to the raw edge of the neckline, and also if you're doing the sleeveless version, the sleeve hole. So I'm going to take that in the same way as we've done before. We're going to divide it up, find the halfway point and so on. Pop a little pin in. And then come in with the garment. So again, you'll have stitched the one shoulder, and we're just going to bring it so as the right side is facing up. Again, so we've got the front and then the back, and then obviously you can see the V there, and the center point for the binding is going to sit on the shoulder seam the same way as we saw previously. So lining up the raw edges, just going to pin the binding in place, and then again find the center points, the quarter points and the outside edge, and just make sure you're keeping that outside edge lined up with the fabric. So yeah, halfway point is going to go to the center of the V, and that's the center of the V on the front and also the center of the V on the back. So there we go, just extend that binding beyond the shoulder, and we'll stitch that shoulder seam together in just a few moments. So again, you might want to move the pins around, just get it neatly balanced and reposition as you go. Take a few minutes just to do this, because of course it's quite obvious, quite a visual part of the garment, so make sure that you do take a bit of time to get it sitting just as you want it to do. So adjust it, squeeze it in, stretch it out, all the different things that you might need to do to get that perfect fit. So once you are happy with that, then you will take it to your overlocker, or you can actually do it on an overcast. Just make sure that those raw edges are all lined up and stitch the full length. And then when you press it back, you can see that you've got a lovely neat finish to it. It's not bound in the same way, so it's not encapsulating the raw edge, but it is sitting nicely. And as I say, it's an alternative way for you to construct your garment. Give it a press to get it sitting nicely. Bit of best press maybe. And then take that shoulder seam, right sides together, lining up the raw edges, lining up the edge of the armhole and making sure that the binding meets up nicely, and then stitch across to secure it. So again, I've neatened the edge there with my overlocker, and I'm just going to get it in position, get it to sit flat, ready for me to put the sleeve in place. So I've got the right side facing up, like so. And you should just about still be able to see where the notches are if you've overcast. But of course you can put your pattern piece back in place if you do need to reposition it. So the sleeve, I actually overcast the whole lot in the end. And as you open it up, you should be able to see where the little notches are there as well. So might need to look a little bit closer, but they are there. So then you're going to position the sleeve. So it's a similar sort of idea to when you putting two pieces together anywhere really in your sewing. You're going to find the centre point. So the centre point of the sleeve, there is a natural little notch. So just find that little notch. If you need a helping hand, then fold your pattern piece in half or find the centre. This one was on the fold, so it is quite easy to do. But if you do need to bring out your pattern piece, don't be afraid to do so. Just reposition it. So put your pattern piece flat. Bring your pattern piece in. Because we've only neatened the edge, it's the exact same size as the pattern was originally. And that kind of gets you in the right ballpark for finding that notch. If you do want to, just go back in with your scissors and just snip them again to make it a little bit easier for you to see. So there's no issue with doing that. And then you find your little points. So the centre V, so that one that was in the middle there, right sides together, that is going to be positioned in place, like so. Then you're going to look for the outside edge and pin that in place. And same on the opposite side, outside edge and pin it in place. Where your little notches are, they are going to line up. So you're going to line up those notches. So again on both sides. Where are they? They're there somewhere. There we go. And then again, you're just going to ease the two pieces together so they sit neatly. You've got kind of a concave and a convex arc. So yeah, it just takes a little bit of manipulating, an innie and an outie, if you will. But again, just utilise your pins just to make sure it all sits nice and flat. Again, manipulate the fabrics, try not to stretch them too much, but hopefully if you've overcast or overlocked the edge, then you'll be minimising that anyway. There we go. So once it's in place, we're going to use that 1 centimetre seam allowance and we're going to take that to the sewing machine and stitch that again with a stretch stitch. So there we go. Remove the pins and you can see that sits quite nicely. Again, I've not pressed it yet. You should really press as you go and then everything will sit nicely. So then we're just going to repeat that with the other sleeve. Okay, so get the pins out, and there you go. You can see both of the sleeves are now in place. Give it a press just to set those seams. It's always good to press after each seam that you've created, just to make sure everything sits nice and flat. And there you go, you can see you've got your left sleeve there and the right sleeve. So next thing that we need to look at is actually doing the side seams. So these will go from the open end of this sleeve up to the armpit, down to the pocket, and where you've already stitched, round the pocket bag, and then down to the hemline. On the sleeveless version, then obviously you don't have to stitch under the sleeve. You just go from the armpit down. So just position your fabrics, lining up those seams, matching them up. Copy the way that the seam went as you attached it in at the shoulder to stop the actual seam twisting. And then just use plenty of pins going from the open edge of the sleeve into the armpit, and then you'll travel from the armpit down. So just get that done first. So yeah, move the fabric around as you need to work it, and just make sure that you're lining up the pieces as you go. So when you go down from the armpit, you'll be lining up the top of the pocket bag, and you'll be able to see the stitch line from where you've actually stitched already. You might need to snip into that seam allowance that you've got on the main body, but you'll stitch down to the point where the stitches are, where the pocket bag was inserted. There you go, you can just see that. So put a pin at that point, because that will be your turning point for you to then go off and stitch around the pocket bag. So again, plenty of pins. Make sure the belt loop is tucked inside, and you can line up any markings that you've got on the back for the belt loop with the belt loop that's on the front. So yeah, just keep it all nice and positioned. Plenty of pins. And then line up the pocket bags. If you're planning on using an overlocker to join the front to the back, it could get a bit tricky when you get to the pocket bag, which is why I neaten the seams beforehand. If you've not got pockets in, then yes, you could use your overlocker to run straight from the armpit right the way down to the ankle hemline. If that's the case, then just position your pins parallel to the edge, or parallel to the raw edge of your fabric. Keep them a little way in, because you don't want your overlocker to catch those as you're going through. And it's just something else to think about. So yeah, just make sure they're out of the way. Still remove them as you get to them, but if there are any that you miss, then you're not hopefully going to do any damage to your blade or your overlocker. At the bottom of the pocket, again, you're going to line up where that stitch line is, and this is where, if you want to, you can do this at the top and the bottom. You just snip into that seam allowance just to give it a little bit more movement, and that's the point where the stitches were for the attachment of the pocket bag to the main body, kind of almost step one really. So again, continue with your pins down to the bottom of the leg. Go, and then you would stitch with your seam allowance along where you've just pinned. So the next thing to do is to pin together the inside leg seam. So matching up the crotch and also matching up the bottom of the legs. again, lots of pins going from the one ankle up the inside leg to the crotch, and then from the crotch down the other leg to the bottom of the hem again. Up the other outside if you've not already done it. Take it off to your sewing machine, stitch those two side seams and the inner leg seam. All done, nearly there. Last thing that we need to do now is to look at the hems. So those are the hems on the sleeve, or the two sleeves, and also the bottom of the leg. So you turn everything inside out, so you've got the right side facing out. Again, give everything a press at this stage. And this is when you need to decide how big a hem that you're wanting on the sleeves and also on the bottom of your legs. And this can be just to your own, this can be to your own personal fit. What I tend to do, get rid of that thread. What I tend to do is just do a single fold on the sleeves because I like them to be quite drapey and quite fluid. So because I've overcast the edge or overlocked the edge, you can just turn it in the once and then just do a top stitch or 2 rows of top stitch if you prefer. Just keep that in place, but it can be as wide as you want. If you prefer double roll it, it's entirely up to you. But I'm going to do a single roll and a top stitch there. And obviously do that on the opposite sleeve, exactly the same. The hem of the leg, I tend to do a little bit differently. I do like to do a double fold because I tend to find that this gives the fabric a bit more weight and so it drapes better on the leg. So yeah, if you've got enough fabric there, then that's fine. Or if you're wanting to, you could just do a single fold. It's entirely up to you in the same way as you've done the sleeve. So that is the next thing. And of course, pockets are in place. You can top stitch the pockets if you're wanting to as well. Sometimes after a press they look okay. Sometimes you need an extra little row of stitches, but you'll just literally go from where they join the main body and stitch along there to make it sit nice and flat. And then the last thing that we need to do is to create the belt if you've chosen to make a belt. So this is made up of long strip of fabric. If you need to join your fabrics, you can do, and that's easily done by just literally crossing them over. So right sides together. Not always easy to see, but cross them over. And we're going to stitch down from the top left hand corner of that box, if you imagine it, down to the bottom right. So just going to pin those two together. And if you've ever done any binding of your own before, this is a mitered seam, which you probably will have done previously. So you can draw a line, but you're literally going from that one point there down to the bottom point on the opposite side. Again with a stretch stitch. There you go, just get those pins out. And you've got a triangle of fabric that you won't actually need in a diagonal seam, as you can see there. So just cut away that excess fabric so as it will sit a little neater. And then press the seam open and press the seam flat from the right side as well. There you go, nice neat seam. There we go. So we need to fold this piece in half, so right sides together along the full length of the belt. And we're going to stitch along the long edge and then also the two short edges. Do leave a turning gap of probably 2-3 inches, just so as you can turn that fabric through, and then pin along the raw edge. And then stitch 1 centimetre in, again with a lightning stitch or a stretch stitch. And then once you've stitched it, turn it through in the same way as we did with the belt loops earlier on. Once it's turned through, give it a good press. Turn in the bit that you used to turn through, so the seam allowance took them in, and top stitch around all 4 sides to make it sit nice and flat. Now this is quite a narrow belt. If you want, you can obviously adjust it, make it wider. Again, it's just personal preference. And then that will feed through the belt loops on the side and tie wherever you want it to tie, at the front, at the side. It's entirely up to you. So there we go. One jumpsuit, all finished. Of course, you can style it out a little bit if you want to. Do be quite creative with your fabrics. So here I've used a sparkly sequined fabric for the sleeves, and I've done the belt in the same fabric. Wanted the sleeves to have a bit more of a kind of drape to them, and you'll see that what I've actually done is extended the bottom line of the sleeve itself. So I just got a knitting needle and used that to extend it, and just measured the point from the edge of the sleeve across to the knitting needle. So they've got kind of more of a pointed look on the underarm. Don't have to. Depends on your fabric, really. I mean, this was quite a weighty fabric, but if you've got something quite lightweight, you might not want to add any more to it. And then you would stitch it into the jumpsuit in exactly the same way as we have done in this tutorial. So no difference there.